All right, well, hello, and welcome to today's webinar, Personalized Data Acquisition Session. This is a follow-up to last week's webinar, Get More Data into Your SCADA. We talked about a lot of different ways to get data into the SCADA system, and today I'd like to show how to do those things using Ignition. So to introduce myself, I am Travis Cox. I serve as the Co-Director of Sales Engineering for Inductive Automation. I was on the previous webinar as a panelist and in the Q&A section. I've been with the company since 2003, since the very beginning, and am an expert in Ignition. I've trained thousands of people on the product. I've done a lot of projects with Ignition for customers, so I've had firsthand experience with being able to use Ignition to get data from multiple different sources to sort of act as a communications hub. And so today I'm going to show you some of that experience and to look at actually how we can make that happen. So to kind of recap from last week, Ignition is a communications hub that connects with pretty much everything. And if you look at this diagram here, the common things that we connect to, of course, are PLCs, and we do that through OPC. We have a built-in OPC-UA server in Ignition with various drivers. We'll touch upon those. And we can also connect up to any third-party OPC server like Kepware, Matricon, etc. So it's very easy to get access to devices using this mechanism. Following that, now with the introduction of IIOT and getting a different infrastructure, we have connectors to MQTT. So the module called the MQTT engine module that allows us to get access to that information. Today we're going to play around with that as well. Those are two major sources of getting data into Ignition from devices, from tags. We can also connect up to LIMS devices. This could be barcode scanners, scales, various sensors that either put ASCII over the network. We have a TCP driver to get that information to Ignition, or they could be serial devices that we connect to. They could be spitting out files that we're reading. There could be different ways we can get access to that information as well. We can communicate to MES and ERP systems. Commonly we do that through web services, but it could also be through a SQL database. So we talk to any standard database that's out there, MySQL, Microsoft SQL Server, Oracle, Postgres, etc. We can actually connect to more by adding various drivers to Ignition. I'll touch upon that here today as well. So databases and web services, connecting to a system through REST or through SOAP, those allow us to get access to pretty much any IT system that's out there, which allows us to get to like ERP and other business applications that are there. So we can integrate with a lot of these different systems through either databases or web services. And we've seen companies connect to Kronos. We've seen them connect to document management systems or to quality systems, all in this, with the same mechanism here. Now, those are the ways of getting data into Ignition. And also, the last one here is OPC-UA. We can get data from other historians, third-party historians like OSI-Pi or others. We can bring that data and just naturally view that on graphs or tables. And there's even ways of putting data into those systems. There are some customers that want to do that. Like I said, those are the ways to get data into Ignition. Then it's about viewing that information, and we can view it on any PC regardless of the operating system, on mobile devices, as well as touch panels and TV displays that happen to be around the plant. So when you look at Ignition as the hub of all of this, you got a server that you install on. It can communicate to all these different sources of data. We can manage that communication. We can bring data back and forth, and then we can ultimately view that information anywhere in the plant. There's a lot of power in what you can build. And that was the whole goal of the previous webinar, is to talk about that kind of power. As a question just came in from Robert, how do you work with dream reports? In that case, commonly dream reports can talk to our database, or we could talk to their database. We do that through SQL. We have companies who are integrating with that, and I don't know if they have APIs or not, but database is the common way that we can work together with that system. So, good question. All right, so couple all of this with the fact that Ignition's unlimited licensing. It allows us to have as many tag screens, clients as you want, which allows us to really build a scalable system. As we want to integrate with more systems, we can easily just bring them into Ignition. So really, let's get into the bulk of today's session is just demonstrate some of these things. So what I'm going to do first is just go through how we can do various things in Ignition, and so you get a sense of all of that, how we connect these systems, and then certainly we can go through questions, and I can use this as an interactive time. So I'm going to basically minimize the PowerPoint here, and I already have Ignition installed on my machine. So I'm on a desktop here. It's a Windows machine, and I've got a blank installation of Ignition. There's nothing else configured on here yet. So we're going to go through and show how to connect to these different systems. First and foremost being devices, and I'm going to go ahead and log into the configuration area for Ignition. And as I mentioned earlier, we connect Ignition to various OPC servers. So if I go down here to OPC connection servers, I can connect up to one or more OPC servers. As you can see, I'm connected to Ignition's local OPC server, and we have drivers built into Ignition. We'll look at those. But I can also connect up to any third-party OPC server, whether it be through UA or through the classic DCOM mechanism, or COM or DCOM mechanism. That's DA versions 2 or higher. So with OPC-UA, I can connect to Kepware, or Matricon, and or any new modern OPC server. And the DA would be for legacy ones. There are a lot of the smaller OPC servers that don't support UA yet, and we can still work with it in the DA fashion. Now, if you ever worked with DCOM, it can be quite a bit of a nightmare. We do have a way of tunneling OPC DA to OPC UA. We have a tunneler product that is free for Ignition that allows us to put that close to the actual OPC DA server and tunnel that through UA to the main Ignition server. So I'm not going to show an example of that. That's pretty old school, but people who want to learn more about that can certainly contact us to see how that would work. And UA is pretty self-explanatory. All we got to do is simply put in an endpoint, which would be the IP address of the server and the port that it's running on. So Kepware runs on 49320, for example, so I can put in something like this to get access to it. So if I look at my local machine for Ignition's local OPC-UA, I can see that here's our OPC-UA server. I can click on that, go next, give it a name, and that would be then connected. So it's very simple to start working with those servers. Now with Ignition's OPC-UA server, we have devices over here. I can connect up to one or more PLCs, and these are the drivers we have built into Ignition. Allen Bradley Ethernet, DMP3, Modbus, RTU over TCP and Modbus TCP, Omron NJ, Siemens S7, some simulators, and a TCP driver for those barcode scanners and scales. So we mentioned a lot of these in the webinar last week, but now I can show a couple of them in action. So we happen to have a couple of PLCs here we can play around with. Here's a Micrologix. I can go down and just give it a name and an IP address. All these drivers are just Ethernet, so we just got to put in an IP address and we're ready to go. And so here's the IP address of the Micrologix. Go create, and I'll get connected. So it should go from disconnected to connected. And again, if we were connecting to a third-party OPC server like Kepware, everything that they're connected to, we'd be able to see here as well. So I have another ControlLogix PLC, and we do support a V20 and prior and V21 Plus. For those of you who are curious, go next. I can give this a name, call it CLX, and I can connect to that. So it really is very simple to get going to multiple devices. I don't have examples for every driver here, but they're all pretty similar, and you can look at the documentation to help get connected to those systems. I also connect to a simulator. For those of you who want to play around and don't have an actual device to work with, you can certainly connect to a sim, and that gives you some tags you can look at least if you wanted to put stuff into databases or whatever. So with this, we can do a lot of things: real-time status control, alarming, all of those things. But commonly, we want to take this data, not only see the live values, but put it into a database. So historically, store that information. So over here, databases, we have connections. We can connect up to one or more databases. And as I mentioned, they're standard, so you see there's already built-in drivers for MySQL, Microsoft SQL Server, Oracle, Postgres, etc. And we do this in Ignition through JDBC, which is a Java database connectivity driver. And there's even ways for you here in the drivers area. If you don't see your database in the list, you can actually add a new driver to Ignition. And every database will provide a JDBC driver for the connection. So there are drivers out there to get to Access, for example, to get to NoSQL databases like MongoDB, There are others out there that you can work with and bring into Ignition. But the standard ones are the ones that are very commonly used. And this is how we can put data into a database. Also, we can connect to databases that we want to bring information into Ignition. So maybe you want to run stored procedures or view that information from these systems. It's very easy to do that once we're connected. So I happen to have a MySQL here locally. I'm going to use that as my example, but again, it could be any of these. So MySQL, I'm going to create a connection, call it MySQL. It's on my local machine, but if it was somewhere else, I'd put the IP address. We'd put the information on how to connect to it. So here I need the database that I want to connect to, in which in my case is test. Put my credentials in to get connected, and that's basically it. Once we put that information in, and it's going to differ a little bit in how we connect for each different database, but the same concepts is there. We put in where it's at, what database we want to go to, credentials, and we can then get connected. So it's very easy to get connected to one or more of these databases. And a lot of times when we connect to these third-party systems, certainly third-party databases, then the IT department can actually make sure that all we get is read-only privileges so that we can't accidentally write to it. So that's how we can safely get to information from ERP or from document management systems or others where we could query data or even run stored procedures and bring that information into Ignition. So I'll show a couple examples of how we can query a database in just a few minutes. So the idea is we can easily connect up to one or more databases here as well. Those are the two common things that we're going to be doing as far as tags and as far as databases. Now we're going to get into some more like MQTT in just a moment. But now that I have those two things, I'm going to launch the designer. And in this case, we're going to actually start utilizing those connections. So I've just connected to them, but I haven't actually done anything with them yet. So I'm sure a lot of you have probably downloaded Ignition, have probably played with getting connected to a device into a database, but this is all, the basics. But if you haven't, at least you can see how you get going with it. So I'm going to create a new project here called Demo, and I'm going to go into the designer. All right, so now here in the designer, over in the left-hand area in the tag browser, this is where we have all of our tags. I don't have any tags in here right yet, so what I'm going to do is go and browse the OPC servers. And again, if we connected to more of them, we'd see them in the list. And I can easily expand, see my devices. There's my micrologics. There's all of the tags that are inside the micrologics. There's my control logics. There's all the name tags that happen to be inside of that device. So it's really just a matter of which ones we want to connect up to. So I can then easily take these tags and drag them into Ignition. And it will create that same hierarchy. Now, of course, we can go in and rename things, inside of Ignition, the tags or the folders. That's up to us. But now I can see the live values of these tags here. So the one thing about Ignition is that when we connect to these different systems, we're going to see live data when we're designing. We're not having to worry about compiling and publishing to a runtime and all that stuff. It's really simple so that we know exactly what's working and what's not. Okay, so we can easily bring in tags from multiple different tag databases into Ignition, so from multiple different devices. So you can see my control logics now in here as well. And like I said, if you have simulator, you can bring in the simulator and bring in those tags. So I've got quite a few tags that I can work with here. And as far as tags, again, just how we'd work with those is typically put them on screens, view the information, control the data, that kind of stuff. So in a window, we could drag tags on and display them in different ways, tanks or LEDs or, numeric labels, or maybe I want to do, two-state toggle buttons or multi-state buttons, for control, or any component that Ignition has we put on screen. So I'm not going to go into crazy detail about how all this stuff works, but we can easily start viewing the information and controlling that information on screens. So if I could bring a meter on, for example, I can stylize that. We can bring in vector graphics. So if I bring in, for example, a motor, and I want the motor to be to change the color to be tinted, based on, let's say, the motor HOA. I can drag the HOA down to the fill paint. If the value is 0, I'm going to make it red and make it somewhat transparent to do a tint. And so this is very, very much what we do as far as HMI with working with the tags that we have there. Okay, so it's once we have the connection to the device, it's really a matter of now going forward and doing more with it. So you can see I've created a small little HMI screen. Okay, so we could also then do calculations on these tags. We have a way in Ignition of doing expression tags, which are calculations off of other tags, or viewing calculations on screens. But we have these tags. We can then go further by logging the tags to a database or doing alarms on tags. And so if we want to utilize that database to its fullest, I can take some of these tags, all of them or a subset of them, and I can log them. So if I go to history here, I did it on the right click of on editing tags. I can see, go to MySQL, and we'll just log it using the historian. It's going to create some tables in the database for me. And now I can start viewing that information on a graph. So I'm going to put on the screen here a graph, take a few of these tags, drag them over, and you're going to see the history of those tags that are now being logged. So we're utilizing the database here to put the tag information in there. That's what the historian's doing. And Ignition's querying the information for us automatically. So if I look in the database, I see there's a bunch of these SQL T tables. These are the tables that the historian creates for us in Ignition. And the actual data is all in there. It's an open format. We can see it, but we don't really want to worry about querying it. Let Ignition query the data for you so we can see that on a screen. That's what's happening here. And we can certainly do a lot more configuration with that chart. But as you can see, we are interfacing with the database. Not only are we putting data in, we're getting data out of the database. And this is, of course, with the historian. The same concept is true if we go and put an alarm on a tag. Let's say here I put an alarm on this Boolean tag that is a fault. It's a critical alarm, let's say, that we're going to do. And here's some notes. It's going to be active when the value goes to 1. And so I want to have that alarm on there. I'm going to also go and log history on the tag. So I'm going to go store history to the MySQL database. And it's a discrete tag, so I'll do discrete. So that's now logging history. And furthermore, what we're going to do is go back to the gateway and go to the alarm journal area so that we can actually utilize the database to store all the alarm events. So I'm going to create a journal that if I go in and add it, now as the alarm is going to happen, so if I make it go active and cleared and active, I'm doing various things. Let me go to a different screen here. If I put on the alarm status table that Ignition has, we can see the current state of all the alarms. We can do things like acknowledgement, and those are storing events into the database. So if I go look, there's now tables for alarms. And look at all the alarm events that have happened so far. And so that allows us to then look at the history, whether it's in a component like this or whether we view it in a table. Ignition has the power to query that data, and whether we're putting it in there or whether that data already existed. So SQL there's a lot of power to SQL and what we can do with it as far as running stored procedures or just viewing information. And so Ignition has built-in ways to use the historian and alarming, but if you had other information you want to work with, you can certainly interface with that directly. So I happen to have in my database, I have some tables already created there's a inventory table here, which is basically just showing, it's just a table with basic inventory, so a name, a description, where the location's at, and the quantity that I have there. And I want to be able to interface with this. Not only do I want to see the information on screen, but I potentially want to put data into the database my own way. I want to do it, through Ignition. This is custom tables that I have, so it's not a built-in thing that Ignition automatically knows about. But we make it very easy to work with databases. So, for example, I can put a table on the window, and we can take any property of any component. So a table has a property called data. I can bind that to a SQL query, or to calculations, or to Ignition's tag history, or to various things. So If I go to Ignition's tag history just real quick and look at bringing a couple of these realistic tags, and let's look at the most recent, I don't know, 1 minute of data. If I bring that back on a table, you can see that Ignition queried the information for me. I didn't have to do that in the database. So that is the first for Ignition's history system. But that table that I just worked with, inventory, we don't know what it is. So I'm going to go actually query that table directly. And I'm going to write the SQL. If you know the SQL language, you can do quite a bit. And I encourage you guys to go SQLzoo.net or other learning resources if you don't know much about SQL, because there's a lot that you could actually do. So if I say select star from inventory, and I just bring that back, put it on screen, there I can see that those 2 records I was dealing with earlier, and you can pretty this thing up and give it better names and descriptions and that kind of stuff. But now I'm seeing that data. And now if I want to put data into it, let's say I build a little form over here where I put a name and the description, and I'll call these components, name, and I'll call it description, and I'll do location. So I'm creating just the text boxes, and then I'm going to create a numeric text field for the quantity. And then I'm going to put a button here that is going to add to the database. So this is very crude, rudimentary here just to illustrate how we can not only view data through the query language, but how we can put data into it. So let's go over here and now add, and this is going to utilize Ignition scripting here to do so. So I'm going to get the name of that I have the text box. I'm going to get the description, and I'm going to get the location, and I'm going to get the quantity. All right, and I can do something really simple like if the name is empty, make sure that they actually will put it in. Please enter in a name. And then if that's good, we're going to run a function called runPrepUpdate with the database, system.db.runPrepUpdate, where I can say insert into my inventory table, and I'm going to do name, description, location, and quantity. Those are the columns there. And I can verify this if we just look in the query browser here, name, description, location, and quantity, QTY. And those are the columns I'm going to go into. And then my values, which are just question marks here, because those values are going to come from my values on the screen. So name, description, location, and quantity. And so with doing that, I can now say that it was entered in. Inventory added. And maybe we can do other things there, but let's just say we do that. So I now have a little form. If I go to preview mode here, if I try to add it, it's going to give me an error, of course. If I had to type one of these, if I can type correctly here, so let me add it. It says, please enter a name. All right, I'm going to enter my name. So, a pump now. And this is my description. And the location is warehouse, 15. And the quantity is 5. And if I go ahead and add it, I get another error here. Let me fix that real quick. System.gui.inventory added. So boom, inventory added. You can see that now it actually did add that row now twice. It actually worked, but I inserted it twice. And I can continue adding more things into a database. And so that is actually physically putting a record into the database that I can see, as you can see here. So we can also call stored procedures and all of those kinds of things. But the idea is that we can not only view the information, but we can modify, insert, update, delete in a database very easily through the SQL language. And in the script here, all that we're doing really at the end of the day, the script is just calling this insert or query. I put some stuff around it for some validation, but that is how we can insert that record. And if we're calling a stored procedure, we have in scripting functions for creating stored procedure calls and then mapping inputs and outputs and working with those. So it is easy to do that. Then now, last thing I want to point out is how we can make dynamic SQL on what we're seeing. So I can see all my records here. What if I wanted the user to be able to search by a name or by a location or something like that? So if I go in now, I put a text box in the window. On the window, I'm going to call it filter. And on the table, I'm going to go back to the SQL query and make this a dynamic query. So I'm going to say where my name is like whatever I happen to type into that text box. So the like is, in my filter get its text, the like is looking for patterns. So anything before or after that's what these parentheses do. I can find records for that. So if I type in motor, I'm going to find all the motor records. You see now there's only 2. If I type in pump, I get the pump records. If I leave it blank, I get all 4 of them. And we could easily provide, filtering. And I could have a drop-down list for the location. I could have quantities, filtering, all that good stuff by modifying and having a dynamic query here to our database. So databases, there's so much we can do with them, and whether it's put on screens, whether we're querying data or putting information in, whether we go over here in our tags, and let's say that I actually want on a tag to do a query tag that is number of inventory items, that is integer, and I do a SQL query that is select count star from inventory. And I want to run this query to the MySQL database every so often, and here I got now 4 records. If I put another one in there, you'll see that this will now be 5 records over here. And maybe I want to take that tag, I want to do alarms on it, or I want to do history on that tag so I can see that over time here. It is very easy for me to work with the database itself. Now, last thing I want to point out with databases is these things called transaction groups. This allows us to map data in and out of a table very easily. And we can do basic history where we put data into a database. We can interface with stored procedures as inputs and outputs. But we could also do things like this. Let's say that I wanted to utilize the database, put a bunch of these tags in here. I want to utilize the database for bidirectional control. So I put a group here with all these tags, and I make it bidirectional, and I'm going to go to a table here called bidirectional. So if the table already existed, I can map data by changing the columns, but here in this case it doesn't, so I'm going to have Ignition create it for me. I'm just going to update the first record. So by creating this little simple transaction group that works with database, you see there's not much I'm doing besides just doing the mappings and specifying where I want it to go with this and the columns. If I look at the table, you can see here's 1 record of data. Every column happens to be one of those tags. Now, if you see that if I change the second Boolean, you're going to see this one's going to go true. If I change the double to 56 to 56.52, you're going to see that in the database it's 56.52. What's important about this is not only are we putting data into a database, but I'm listening for what's in the database. I'm going to put it down to the PLC or any other potential source. So I'm going to go ahead and now edit a value in the database. I'm going to go and set this float to 63.3. I'm going to apply, and what's going to happen is you're going to see that value get written to the tag. So Ignition is managing the communication between these 2 sources, and we're allowed to do a lot. The SQL Bridge modules was what provides these transaction groups, and there's so much we can do with them by either just putting data into a database, putting data from the database to the PLC, doing bidirectional. We can have multiple groups, some that are triggered based on expressions, so we only run them when certain things happen, like a trigger in the PLC going true. Or if we're interfacing with stored procedures, we can specify a stored procedure and map these tags as inputs or outputs. So in here I can say it's going to be an input parameter, an output parameter, or it's going to be an input parameter, what parameter it's going to be. These things we can easily map, allowing us to work with those and using custom stuff that happens to be in the database. So this really gives you the true power of being able to work with databases. You can go off and do a lot of things. Now, last thing I want to point out with databases is that I showed how we do a SQL query on the screen, and this is off of our custom table. But Ignition's putting alarm data and other information to a database, and that also means that you can query it to go further as well. We have a template in Cloud Templates that is a way of doing alarm analysis. I'm going to import that into my project here. And I want to point out that this particular alarm analysis, this component, as you can see, it's already working. It just has queries. So if I look at this thing, you can see that if I want to look at the alarms by count, it's just doing a SQL query where I'm going to our alarm events table that Ignition has, and we're doing some filtering and some other things to give us the information that we want. So it's very, very easy for us to query any data that happens to be in the database. So this is why very common that customers integrate with other third-party databases, and whether they're behind third-party systems or whether they're intermediary databases between these systems, there's a lot of flexibility in what we can actually do. Okay, so now let's go on to MQTT. We talked about OPC and creating tags from that. So that's one way of getting data. MQTT is for IIOT. It's basically being able to talk to a messaging middleware, so to a MQTT broker or server, and we can immediately get access to those tags as well. If you're not that familiar with MQTT, that's okay. We can certainly talk more with you at a later point, maybe if you want a private demo. But we could easily go in, and I'm going to go into our downloads area, and I'm going to download the module for Ignition, the MQTT engine module. I'm going to go ahead and download that. And I'm going to add this to Ignition on the fly. So to also show that Ignition's modular allows us to connect to new things if we come out with new modules very easily. So I've got this module. I go here to my modules area. I install. I'm going to go to my desktop, downloads, get the MQTT engine module, install it. All right, so I've got the MQTT engine. It's running. Now with that, it adds a new setting over here called MQTT engine settings. I can connect up to a broker. So I'm going to connect up to we have a cloud broker. It's available at iademo.inductiveautomation.com. All the defaults would be the same. Connect up to it. Now what that's going to do for us, if I go in the designer, is we're going to see tags now from MQTT. So if I go down here to all providers, there's the MQTT engine. And if I go to my clients here, I'm definitely connected. And so let me refresh again and see there's my edge nodes. There's the demo. This is a edge of network devices publishing data, and there's a PLC up there. And here's all the tags that are immediately coming in that I could easily put on screens and now view from MQTT. And we could certainly then go and do alarms and history from those tags as well. Same kind of system, except for we automatically are seeing data from these brokers, and it makes it easy to work with that. All right. Last couple things I want to point out. I'm going to go back here to the gateway. I talked about connecting up to OPC-UA for historical data as well. And for that, we can go into the configuration of Ignition, go into tags history, and we could add a new historical provider, and we can connect to an OPC-UA, which could be an OSI Pi or others, whether it's on a local machine that Ignition's on or whether it is a remote system that's there. Okay, so that will get access to that data there, and with like LIMS devices, the TCP driver and serial, we have ways of getting to those as well by connecting that in the devices area. Now, last thing we're going to look at, and then we're just going to get to all the questions you guys have, is talking to web services. People always want to know, how do you do web services in Ignition? And there are a couple different ways that we can go about it, but the easiest and the most flexible is just utilizing the libraries we have built into scripting to get access to these systems. I happen to already have a web service we're going to play around with. It's a REST API. There's also SOAP APIs out there that we can get access to, and we can look at an example of both of these. But the first one's the SOAP API. So I'm going to go in on a button, and I'm going to go into the script of the button, and we have a function called system.net.http get or post. That allows us to work with these REST APIs. So my REST API, the particular function I have is to get work orders, and it's a get. So I'm going to actually connect to an ERP system here. And I'm going to do a get, and the URL for me is this URL, and I'm going to put that in, and then it requires us to do an authentication, so I need to specify a username and a password here, and so and sometimes you have to pass in header values and other things depending on the API. I'm going to pass in the username is admin and the password is password, and this is going to return me JSON. Actually, it's going to be returning me a JSON string, which I'm going to utilize Ignition's system.json or system.util.json and decode, which takes a string and gives us the actual object. And I'm going to print the JSON object here on the screen. And I know that this one actually returns to me work orders. So I'm actually going to go for work order in that I want to print work order of the actual work order number. So this is now I can loop through all the work orders that come back from this call. I can do something with them. Maybe put them in the database. Maybe send them to another web service. Whatever we're happening to do. So now that I've got this little bit of code, which is going to HTTP get the result, turn it into JSON, so that I can actually see it and print it out. So if I look here and I go to the console for Ignition, if I press this button, you will see that it was successful. I got the work orders. Here's the result that I got back. I loop through. Here's all the individual work orders that I worked with. And in my particular case, the work order is that particular call. I can pass something in, which is if I want to see active or not. So like completed or active. So I'm going to add a checkbox to the window, and the checkbox will be, I want to show active. So if I go in here, I can now pass in active equals, and I'm going to get that. So in my URL, I'm going to get the checkbox from the window, get it, if it's selected or not, pass it into the active, and so if I clear this out, that's essentially the same call I got last time. Now if I uncheck it, I see that now I have only 3 work orders versus if I had it checked, I had more. So I am now interfacing with that, and I can then do something with those results and go further. Now certainly, we may not be doing this on screens, but if you're going to put data back into ERP or whatever else, it might be on a screen when they press a button. It might be on a tag. When a tag changes, they write that value back to ERP. Like when the production run's complete or whatever, we might put a script on the tag itself. There's a tag change script that we can put on there and do the same exact type of call. But if you wanted to view that information on screen, there's also a really handy way in Ignition. I'm going to go to another screen here, and there's a handy little way, a little trick. I'm going a little bit quick here. This will be recorded so you guys can go back and look at this. There's a trick in scripting as well where you could actually make a function. I'm going to call mine get work orders, and I'm actually going to go through all the work orders and I'm going to basically create a data set out of this. So product quantity. So I get back the product and the quantity and the work orders. I'm going to append this to an actual list, and then I'm going to return a data set object. This is what we use on our tables. How we have multiple rows, multiple columns of data. And so I'm going to basically bring back all the information, put it into a table with the right headers here and the data. So I'm going to do that API call. I'm going to create a data set out of it, which is what the system.dataset function is for. And then I'm going to, through binding, I could actually link the data set. Rather than to a SQL query, I'm going to link it to the run script, which allows us to get to that API call. And so I'm going to say self.getWorkOrders, and I press OK. You can see that now the table has the work orders that came back. And if I really wanted to, I could, again, put a checkbox on the window like we did previously, and I could interface with this by my function having an actual argument. So I'm going to have a active, and again, rather than doing that, I'll pass in the active. And so I'm going to, in my function now, use the checkbox in binding, selected value, to, you can see now I got back 3. If I check it, I give back all of those. Really handy way to be able to work with scripts to get to APIs and do this. Now there's no product out there that I've seen that makes working with certain APIs very easy, because they're all custom as far as what we pass in, what we bring back. And so we've just chosen to give you the easy functionality in scripting so that you can make your own decisions and work with it that way. Now, part of one of our partners, Sepasoft, they make a web services module that does have a nice UI around these functions. So there is a way of doing some simple mappings and working with these services, specifically when you get to MES realm, that makes it easier. But this possibility is there, and it's just a matter of using it. We could also interface with SUDS, which is for actual SOAP-based APIs. I don't know if anybody's curious that, you know, I did all of the rest here, but certainly we can do SOAP as well, and that is utilizing our SUDS library. And essentially, you can go look at the documentation for it, but this is like, here's a small example. Let me just do it in the script console. So here's an example of getting to a calculator. That's the WSDL, and then the Fahrenheit value will be 89.5, and the Celsius value we're going to get from that, as I'll print that out to the console here. So if I execute this, it's going to go and call a SOAP API that's in the cloud, right? That's it's on from W3 Schools. It's going to pass an 89.5. It gets back 31.94. And I could work with the SUDS library as well. SOAP makes it, you know, nice named functions versus REST, but we have options for both of those in Ignition. Like I said, the Sepasoft MES Web Services module makes it easier to do these things. All right. Well, there's certainly a lot more that we can connect up to and we can do. Hopefully this gives you some starting points and some ways of looking at this, because this is how we can integrate all these systems together. If we can connect to a database, we can bring results back on a screen, select a result there, go query another system, bring back more results, and we could have these things work together by just simply utilizing what I've shown here today. So let's get over to the Q&A portion of it. And you know, if I need to come back to Designer, I will for the Q&A. So we can show it, but again, if you guys have questions, please fill those in. All right, so the first question is from Colin is, if I just need the SQL Bridge module license for now, do I still use the Ignition Designer interface to program the tags and the transaction groups? Does a 2-hour trial limit just fall away for the SQL Bridge module and remain in place for everything else, like say the Vision module? So yes and yes. You still need the designer to go and create tags and to actually configure the transaction groups as I showed up here. But you won't have, you know, if you didn't have the Vision module installed, you wouldn't see the Windows area. But the designer's for the platform, right? You still have to go in there and configure those things. The 2-hour trial restriction will, every module that is installed on my system's licensed here, but every module that's installed will either be activated or not. The ones that are in trial will adhere to the 2-hour trial period. The ones that are activated are going to run forever. So you can have some modules activated and some that are in trial. Like in your case, if you just have SQL Bridge and if Vision could be in trial, it'll run in the 2-hour trial period there for you. Now the designer in the system will never time out. It doesn't matter what you have. It doesn't time out. So you can do your configuration there. All right, from Berardino, hi Travis, is it possible to provide an example about OPC-HDA? I haven't seen much in the docs. So I wish I had an example here of a third-party historian. I don't. We can certainly get together at a later point if you happen to have one. I can show you how this works. The idea is an HDA. You can do an HDA connection, and it's going to be through COM. So it will hopefully, if it's on the same machine, it will find your third-party HDA server. If it's not on the same machine, if it's remote, now you have to get into the DCOM stuff, which is quite complicated. But the way it works is the way COM works. We're just specifying a prog ID to get to that system. Once we have it, we can easily connect and see the information. Once you're able to connect, what it will do is on screens. If I had a graph on the screen, a chart, and I want to add a tag, it would show up as another item in here for that third-party OPC HDA, and I can just select the tags and view them the exact same way we would do it with our historian, and select the items we want on the graph and then view it. But so you can have tags from Ignition as well as a third party on the same graph or table or whatever by being able to connect to that system. So you got to use COM for that system, for OPC HDA. And if you need help with it, I can certainly do that at a later point. Just contact me. All right, question from Kevin. Is it possible to connect the historian up to Emerson Delta V continuous historian? Well, as we showed today, there's only really two ways we can get access to, or three ways we can get access to these third-party systems. So if that historian supports OPC HDA, we're good to go. We can connect up to it. If it doesn't, we have to be able to get to the data in some way, which means maybe a database backend, an OWC connection that we can possibly get to, or an API, a REST or SOAP-based API. Whenever somebody asks me, can I connect to the system, the first thing I'm going to say is, yes, if it's database, if it's OPC, HDA, or UA, if it is web services, or if we can get access to the data in a raw format like a file, then yes. Other than that, it may be very difficult to get those connections to work with. We do only have standard mechanisms, but we also provide a module SDK, so there is potential for customers to build their own custom module for a custom proprietary type connection that's there. So there are ways of getting access to more, but they're not just built in from base install. So good question, Kevin. All right, John said, without tag historian, how long does Ignition keep our PLC data so we can compare previous runs to current or run reports, etc.? Without the tag historian, we don't keep any historical data. So Ignition, when you just connect up to a device and view the information, it's live data. If we don't log that data to a database, then we're not going to track that history. So as soon as you log it to a database, it could be a local MySQL or whatever. Then you have the information. Then you can have it store as much as you want, essentially. Without the tag historian, it is possible to create a trend that is real time. That where the data, you can see the data come in, but when you close the window, it will get lost. It is possible to do that. Unfortunately, it'll be through scripting to actually add the data to that. There's an example in the forum on how to make a true real-time trend without any history modules for Ignition. All right, John also asked, what's the main differences between the SQL Bridge versus tag historian? Oh, that's a very good question, which is warrants a very long response. But the basics is the tag historian is designed to be a very efficient storage of history to a database. We control the format, meaning we control the schema of the database. So these SQL T tables here, we control that. And we also partition data into multiple chunks, multiple tables here by month. By default, it's month. So we are very efficient in how we put data in there. We do it by exception. We have an algorithm in there to limit the points going in. We provide interpolation. We do the querying for you. It's very simple. The transaction groups, in contrast, you're in control of the format. You can put data into any table you want, map data in and out. You can not only do history, but you can also do recipe management. You can do bi-directional control. You can run stored procedures. You can do other things there. So basically, you're putting more control into your hands, and versus historian is just everything's done for you because nobody wants to have to worry about that when they're configuring it. So the transaction groups don't have they don't have any compression. They don't do interpolations. It's different. It's a different model. But you can use, commonly customers will use a combination of the two to really get a complete system that's there. Good question, John. Oh, another question from John. Who did you say made working with MES data easier? That's our main use here, not SCADA. We have MES offerings for ignition, and Inductive Automation provides the platform. We partner with a company called Cepasoft. If you look at the website, they provide the MES modules, OE downtime, track and trace, SPC, and recipe management, and the web services module I was telling you about. You go website, take a look at those. You guys can request demonstrations of that, as well as you can download and play around with it. It's on the downloads area. It's on the website there. So it's a company called Cepasoft. They make the MES. We partner with them, like we partner with CirrusLink for the MQTT modules, and that will extend the ability for ignition because they have the vertical expertise in those arenas. All right, question from Robert. How would you interface an IP camera into ignition using an H.264 video stream? So the H.264 video stream, we don't have a built-in, because that requires codec, we don't have a built-in component for that. We do have a built-in component for, it's called the IP camera viewer, and that allows us to view IP cameras that support MJPEG stream and JPEG stills. So it doesn't have the H.264 in it. And I'm going to get you an example of this IP camera here in just a moment. So I happen to have a camera here that is it's a JPEG stills, but you can do MJPEG stream here or JPEG stills. And if I put the URL in, I should get connected. It's a camera that we use for the MQTT stuff and see some lights. Nothing exciting, but we support those two natively. Now it's possible for you to build a module for ignition that could actually work with VLC. There's a project out there called VLC for J, which you can actually build a module which can add a component to ignition to view that, but it requires the codec. So there's nothing built in automatically. We are Java, and so you could do more there. Hopefully that helps you with that. MJPEG stream is definitely the way to go if it supports that as well. Now, also with videos, I want to mention that there's other systems that do video surveillance, like Cisco vSOM. There's others out there, and a lot of those have APIs. So we can actually go and get a picture from a point in time from the past, and we can actually play back video from that. So if customers integrate our historian alarming system with that, and that they go back in time, look at a trend, click on a point in the trend, and see the picture of the plant, or they replay it from that point, or alarm happened, they'll look at that as well. We have a lot of customers doing it successfully with Cisco vSOM. So that is another possibility. We talk about integration. All right, Craig, can you query tag historian, or is that only for transaction groups? You can query the tag historian. The problem with querying it yourself is that we partition the data by default into multiple tables. So if you want to query 2 months, for example, you got to query 2 different tables. It's much harder for you to do that, whereas SQL Bridge just goes into one table, so it makes it much easier for you to query. There's nothing saying you can't query it. It's just that the historian is very efficient for storage, and we do the interpolation, we do the querying across partitions for you, so we make that part easier. But it is possible to go back and look at that data if you wanted to. All right, and Robert, we will follow up with you about developing a module. So we'll make sure that happens. Robert Lecker. Looks like that's all the questions we have in here, and we're 2 minutes shy here. So hopefully you guys had got a lot out of the session today. Oh, there's a couple more just came in. The efficient compression is vital versus no compression. Yeah, that's why the tag historian, that's why it's important. And we have all the facilities to query that data for you. Like I said, on graphs or tables, we will do that. Also in scripting, you can query data. You can perform calculations and whatever else with the historian. So there is stuff built in Ignition for that without having to query the data yourself directly. And then Praful has a question, does MQTT allow two-way communication? Yes, it does. It is bi-directional. It's meant for SCADA. It's also stateful and low bandwidth and secure. And what lies between EON device and the Ignition MQTT module? The MQTT server lies in between the edge of network device and the MQTT engine module for Ignition. So if you were to look at an architecture here of the IIoT stuff of MQTT. Let me bring it over here. I'm going to show you an actual architecture. The edge of network device is close to the PLCs. It's publishing data by exception through MQTT to a broker, to an MQTT server. It's in the middle. It's middleware. Could be IBM's, could be Amazon's, could be Ignition has another module called distributor. That is an MQTT server. It could be Mosquito or any other broker. And that's what's in between. And Ignition just simply subscribes to data through the engine module. But it could be any other application could subscribe to data as well. Other line of business applications. That's the beauty of MQTT. Having the middleware, it's like an enterprise service bus that we can get our data to access to multiple people, and we're pushing data up versus going and having to have a SCADA system connect and pull the data directly from the device. Okay, last question here, and then we're going to wrap up. We ordered MES, but not tag historian or SQL Bridge. Will we be able to retain past data for MES reports? So you do not need tag historian or SQL Bridge for the MES information. They log that data to a database as well. You would need the tag historian or SQL Bridge if you want to log process data, other tags along with the MES data. So you don't technically have to have it, but if you want it, you can use it and you can do more with that information. So it's a nicety there. All right, well that wraps it up. I appreciate you guys coming here today. Hopefully you got a lot out of the session. If you want a further deep dive with myself, please contact your sales representative here, your account representative. If you don't know who that is, just simply call a 1-800 number and just ask for sales, and they'll get you to get a demo set up with me, and we can certainly go into this in more detail. Thanks a lot. Have a great day. Talk to you later.